guys, here come the dollies. They got fresh sinkers, hot coffee, and the sweetest smile.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Clubmobile. We're super excited to have Hattie Hearn from the Imperial War Museum hanging out with us today. Hattie, thanks so much for coming and hang out.
Hey, thank you so much for inviting me on. Really excited to talk all things American Red Cross.
So are we.
We're also really excited. We were talking a couple of days ago, and we feel like this is, I guess, the redeemable one from episode 1, where everything technically went wrong, and we tried to talk about the American Red Cross. And in episode 1, something cuts out and it starts over. So we're guessing that everyone just kind of quit listening after that technical hitch. So this one is the do-over, I guess.
Every time I
hopefully
see
we haven't
somebody,
jinxed that.
Yes, every time I see somebody listening to episode 1, I go, "Oh God!"
It's like, "Oh no, please choose something else.
Pick something else."
So, I just want to dive right in. I went on a school trip to Duxford when I was 5 or 6, and I gave no care to what I was learning about. How did you find your way there?
Good question. I think everyone goes to Duxford on a school trip at one point or another. If you live well, you're from Suffolk, aren't you? So,
Yeah.
which is where I'm from as well. So I think it's just a rite of passage to go to Duxford. And actually, it was definitely one of the places where my love of all things aviation and World War II really started. So how I came to work there, it's a bit of a long story, but as a kid, absolutely obsessed with war, World War I, World War II, and growing up right next to an American airfield in Bungay, Suffolk. I always had an interest in it and would take any chance I could get to go out to a museum. And then as I went through school, I realised that maybe I could actually make a living out of history and choose that as my career path. So I went to uni and I did war studies and history. So lots of military history, really honed in on the Second World War. And then after that, I decided that actually what I really love, my two loves, museums and heritage and World War II, I could combine them. So I did a master's in museum studies and cultural heritage, and worked for the National Trust and as a heritage consultant. And then eventually the opportunity came up to do a PhD, which I took. And my PhD was all about the 8th Air Force. But I was particularly interested in the cultural and social history of the American air bases. Not so much what happened up in the air, although it obviously had huge impacts on life on the ground. But what I really wanted to know was kind of a deep dive into the everyday lives of the Americans. And as I began researching, I soon realised that there are actually plenty of women as well on the air bases. So that's been a really interesting kind of learning curve. So to cut this long story short, after doing my PhD and working at another museum in just outside of Norwich, the Radar Museum, I saw this job come up for the curator of the American Air Museum at Duxford, and I just felt like I hit the jackpot when I actually got the job. It really was my dream job. So I've been at the museum for a couple of years now, and during that time I've had a chance to delve into all aspects of American air power history, because at the museum we tell the story of American air power and the Anglo-American relationship from the First World War all the way through to the present day, and a large part of that is what happened in the Second World War in East Anglia with the friendly invasion.
It's always counted as a friendly invasion, and it's still going on now. I feel like I'm kind of a product of it. I married an American airman who was based at Mildenhall, and that's how I ended up here in the States. What was the thing you found the most interesting as you have progressed in your education, in your studies into that?
Oh, that's a good question. I think what I never really appreciated was how the Second World War really impacted everyone, even though the remote villages where I'm from, where you maybe only have like a couple of hundred people, if that.
Yeah.
And you would think being out the way in East Anglia, out of harm's way, you would have thought, but actually when you've got an airbase on your doorstep, 3,000 Americans just piling in, and you've got these bombers, you've got fighter planes. It's such a huge cultural, social, and environmental impact. I mean, if you drive around East Anglia today, you can still see bits of runway, old Nissen huts. The legacy is still very much there. So I do think it is how we often look at World War II as a kind of a grand narrative, but when you hone down to even the smallest level of one airbase, you can find there's so many fascinating kind of micro histories and different like kind of social the communities that formed up. So I think that's what I'm particularly interested in.
For sure.
I'm just sitting here. I'm amazed. I think the only thing I want to be you when I grow up.
Me too.
Yes. Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. To go into school, study history, know that that's what you want to do. I mean, I regret it wholeheartedly. I wish I had found, not regret it. I wish I had found my passion for this earlier in my life.
Yeah.
And not studied what I studied in school. Although I don't regret what I studied. But
I feel exactly the same.
Right?
I decided because see in school, I'm not sure what the age difference is between us, Hattie. I'm 30. So I don't know if we went
32.
to school. Yeah, we went to school around the
Yeah, so you're
same
like
time
same
then.
age, yeah.
But my history lessons during my GCSE years were the American West. So
Oh, yeah, we did the American West.
I didn't get any of World War II or any of the local history, weirdly enough. So
No.
finding it since I moved here in the past 3 or 4 years, learning all about this, I kind of feel a bit cheated because it was all
I
there in
know.
front of me. Because I
Yeah, yeah.
grew up in Bury St Edmunds, so it's
Oh, so in
literally
Rougham, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
it is annoying. It's such a shame that it's not taught more because, like you, we did the American West, and very much like kind of global history or kind of history really does not affect our local lives, but we had all that amazing stuff on our doorstep. So that's what I try to do. I go into schools a couple of times a year, and I wrote a children's book a few years ago. So I take that in and kind of talk about some of those stories that
that's
happened
so great.
in the local
amazing.
area.
Please, you have to send us the book because my kids
Oh, I
will love
will.
it. Please.
Yes. Yeah.
What was it that kind of spurred your interest around the American Red Cross? Was it the fact that it was just these 3 women on base, or was it something that led you to it?
I think it all stems back to my PhD, and as part of my research, I was actually researching into the 100th Bomb Group and also the 44th Bomb Group, which is a liberator unit. But when I was going through these operational records, which were kept at the time, so you've got everything, every kind of smallest details about life on base. And one of the reports that was filed every month was the report from the American Red Cross field director. And in that report, it had so much valuable information, like how many sandwiches they served in the club that month, and what dances they had, and what kind of classes they put on for the boys. So that just gave such a fascinating snapshot into the lives of the American Red Cross. And before that time, I really had not considered that there were women on the base. You think of these places as being such masculine environments, which they were. And there certainly were women kind of coming on and off and onto the base in the civilian capacity. But the fact that you had these women also living there permanently amongst all these thousands of men, it was such an incredible kind of situation that's what really sparked my interest. And the more I dug into it, the more I realised that the American Red Cross's remit went so much further beyond just running aero clubs on the base. They also were running Clubmobiles, as we know. They were running service clubs in all of the towns and cities. They're also running American Red Cross rest homes, which were basically requisitioned country houses, usually in the southwest of England, which they converted into kind of convalescent homes, kind of for flyers. Usually halfway through their tours of duty, they would be sent down to one of these homes, and obviously you see that in Masters of the Air. So they were responsible for running those alongside the 8th Air Force, and then they also had the arm which was helping so if the guys, for example, wanted to get a divorce while they were over here, or they had maybe their family member was ill over in the States, they could go to the American Red Cross and they might give them a loan. They would help file the divorce papers. So they were really the kind of connection between America and their life in England.
Yeah. I really wish that there had been more of that. I know that Masters of the Air was supposed to be just about the men and them flying, obviously. I wish that there had been more of a depiction of the girls, because knowing what we know now, especially after speaking with Harriet Leach, who portrayed Tatty, I feel slightly robbed of all of that.
Same. I was really thought there'd be more.
Yeah. How did you feel about the depiction? Did you feel like it was such a small part, or I wish there had been more?
Yeah.
I know. I wish there'd been more. I was just really glad they included them to begin with. Obviously we have other films about and series about the air war, and I don't think there's really been any representation of the American Red Cross. So it was a great start. And I think the portrayal of their uniforms and kind of the activities that they were doing on the base was really good. It's kind of a shame almost that they weren't given their own storylines other than just being kind of connected in a like sort of love interest fashion. I feel like maybe if they had an extra episode, they could have focused a bit more.
That extra episode,
yeah.
An extra 5, episodes. Thank you.
Yeah. When they were filming, just after they'd finished filming Masters of the Air, I had an opportunity with some volunteers at Thorpe Abbott's to go onto the set, and one of the areas we visited was the Red Cross Nissen hut with their billets.
Amazing.
And it was amazing. They did such a good job on the finest little details, like the perfume bottles that they had on the bedside, and like little photographs. And I was so excited because I thought there would be like loads of scenes with the ARC, but they didn't make the cut. But
they only used it for that one. They only used it for that
little
one
blip at
that
the
tiny
end.
blip at the end.
Churchill's making his speech. I know.
Oh goodness.
What was I going to ask you? So many questions, but I think I was most when doing our research, and I think Winnie, you felt the same way. We were kind of, after watching Masters of the Air, finding out more about the Red Cross, and then doing our research, we were kind of surprised to find out that they didn't all live on an airbase. A lot of them lived in these estate homes, and they would travel on their bus, right? And then after I visited Thorpe Abbott's a couple weeks ago, they were telling me, no, that we had 3 that lived here.
Yeah. So
and I was they were the only Thorpe Abbott's was the only base at all to have 3 girls that lived with lived amongst the men. Is there a reason why Thorpe Abbott's was the only one?
I do think that the other bases must have had the women living on the base, because so you've got a bit of a separation. You have the American Red Cross Aero Club staff. So the aero clubs were each base had its own aero club, and these clubs were open usually from about 11 a.m. to really late at night, and they had a club director and then a couple of staff assistants who would be living on the base, and they usually had Nissen hut next door to the club itself. So most of the air bases would have had that set up, but I think that Thorpe Abbott's, because we know the women who work there, and we got the great photograph of them, so it's often assumed that maybe they're the only ones who had staff living on the base. But you also had American Red Cross volunteers living outside of the base. So there were billets in towns and villages where the Clubmobile staff would have lived, and they would have had their Clubmobile parked nearby, and also a warehouse with stores, the donut mix and all that sort of stuff. And they would then have several air bases that they would travel round in a week. So they might visit Thorpe Abbott's once or twice a week, and then they would go down to Horham, they'd go down to Eye. So they had a kind of catchment area where they would take their Clubmobile. So you do have a bit of a crossover between the Red Cross women who are on the base and then also the visiting Clubmobile staff, which makes the kind of Tatty Spot's storyline a little bit confusing, because she work, but I assume she was a Clubmobile. She was in real life, and I think that portrayal is that she was a Clubmobile in Masters of the Air. So she wouldn't have been on the base, but she would have been outside in local billets. But you would have had the 3 or maybe 4 Red Cross staff actually on the base, and then you would have had a whole army of British civilians as well who volunteered at the Aero Club. So they were kind of quite huge operations.
Yeah, they were
That's
huge.
very interesting. I didn't even know that the civilians volunteered at the Aero Club. I thought it was like strictly
Same.
No, so
strictly
there's quite
Red
a few
Cross
accounts.
or enlisted
Yeah.
volunteers. You had to be enlisted. You weren't a civilian. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and often if you read some memoirs from the Red Cross women on the base, the American ones, they often gave the credit to British staff members for doing a lot of the legwork. So they're the ones in the kitchens preparing the sandwiches. But it was the American women who really were on the front line, as it were. They were the ones who were talking with the men. They would be the ones who would go to the post-mission interrogations with the donuts and the coffee. The idea being that it was the first face that the guys would have seen when they landed would have been an American woman, and sort of a morale boosting sort of exercise. So yeah, I feel like from reading into the American Red Cross, particularly those Aero Club staff members and the Clubmobile staff, that they were there not so much to dish out donuts and to dish out coffee, but really as a representation of home. And if you read newspaper reports and the ARC's own literature, you just hear that word home so often, because even in training they were taught how to converse with guys from all across the US. I know there's one woman who went for her interview, and she had been through college, she had an amazing education, but the one thing that they really cared about was that she had visited all of the states, so she could sort of say a little bit about each state in the US.
wow.
So that meant when she was on the base, she could kind of make conversation with anyone. So that was a real key quality. But yeah, it's just amazing actually as you look when you look into the background of these women, how educated they were. So to work for the Red Cross overseas, you had to have a college education, you had to be over 25. So these women had a lot of life experiences and a lot of education behind them.
That's very, I love that. And I think I love that because we had read a story. I talked about this the last time when we were talking to Harriet Leach. We had read a story about a Red Cross girl who, I mean, they really were there to converse with the men. They were there to be a friendly face, about one of the girls who I believe it was Thorpe Babbitt's, right, Winnie? And it was after the mission.
I
It was
think
after
so.
the mission to Munster when only the one
Yes.
plane had come back. One of the girls walked the path from the officers club to the Red Cross hut with one of the men from Rosie Rosenthal's crew, just walked with him back and forth till 3 a.m., letting him kind of wrap his head around what had happened. And then she got up and did her job the next day without batting an eye, because that was just what they were there to do. And I think we said this in the first episode, they did so much more than just serve coffee and donuts.
Yeah.
100%.
People just associate them with, oh, they were the girls on the Clubmobiles with the coffee and the donuts, or they were the nurses, right? Red Cross nurses.
Yeah.
But they did so much more. And I think that the more we dig into it, the more I'm just continually amazed by what these women did.
Yeah.
And at 25
it's really
too. I
incredible.
mean, what was I doing at 25?
I know.
That's
I know.
At 25, they were classified as having enough life experience and enough time under their belt to go out and do something like this. I don't know if I could do that at 25.
No.
That's a big ask.
It really is. And the fact that obviously all these women were volunteers, and they were also at a stage in their life when they could have been focusing on their careers, or they could have been starting a family, and they volunteered to go overseas and spend however long it took to get the job done, basically. And well, actually at work, one of the projects that I've just launched is a project to try to find all of the names of the American Red Cross women who served in Britain, and then to put that onto our database on the American Air Museum website. So it's been an enormous task. We've probably found maybe 200 to 300 names, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. And what we're trying to do, me and a small band of volunteers, is to research the lives of these women, what they did before they enlisted and then what they did after, and just finding out about some of these women's stories is incredible, because they often, as I said, went to college, and many of them were teachers, they were social workers, and they had they're clearly very caring women. They were very educated. They had great social skills, and they could have done anything, but they chose to volunteer over here. And actually, often the women were from kind of higher social classes. Often, for example, a rich Southern family that might be a daughter of a congressman, for example, or even like Hattie Spots. She was obviously the daughter of Carl Spots, who was one of the commanders of the 8th Air Force. So they came from really well-to-do backgrounds, and then suddenly they find themselves in a cold English field, dishing out donuts and coffee grinds in their hair. And it's really amazing what they put themselves through. And there must have been a huge emotional effect of that as well, of not only talking to the guys and kind of allowing them to unload all of their problems onto them and trying to just put on this brave face, but then also seeing all of these men go out and then not return. And like you said with that story about one of the women at Thorpe Abbott's, and I think it was actually Rosie who came back, and him being the only B-17 on that day, on that mission to Munster, to come back, and he just spends hours walking up and down and just unloading this huge emotional burden. And then we never really consider that for that woman who heard all of those horrible things and all of his stress, and she had to internalize that. So that's something that wasn't appreciated. And these women, because they're volunteers, civilian volunteers, they never got that veteran status. So they were really never recognized for that work. And when you look at the stories of these women after the war, many of them went on to carry on working as teachers, working as social workers, just being really productive members of society. But a lot of them, the women, didn't end up marrying, and they maybe even worked for the Red Cross full time after the war. And they never really got a chance to talk about their experiences. So we're kind of missing their stories, which is such a shame. And now, because I don't think there are any left, because they're obviously a little bit older when they joined up. So we never really got that chance to go back and say, what was it like for you? How did this job affect you?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you're doing that, because through a lot of our research, there's always this sudden stopping point of, yes, she served, nothing else happens. I think we tried to look into Tatty for the longest time.
There's not much on
there's
her.
nothing afterwards, which is so surprising because of who her dad was. You would think that there would be a lot of things of after.
Especially she was the youngest on the service.
Yeah.
She was underneath the 25 age threshold. I think she was 22. So she was I mean, you would imagine she would spark some interest, especially after Masters of the Air, but I've even gone on the Red Cross, the museum website in DC, and there's nothing.
There's nothing, yeah.
Short of going down to DC and knocking on the door and asking them,
tell me
everything on Tattie's beds. But
we find that with a lot of the women, they just kind of fall off the face of the earth. And the problem with researching the women is actually because a lot of them got married after the war, so then their surnames change, and then it's really hard to find out what happened to them. And because we don't have the same military records like we have for the guys, then again you don't have that angle. And one area actually that we're also exploring, it's quite difficult because there's not too many records, but it's the African American women who served in the American Red Cross in Britain, which is a really interesting story that I had no idea about until relatively recently. So that's been super fascinating, because we found out that there were at least 2 Clubmobiles which were crewed entirely by Black Americans, and one of those was called the Clubmobile Massachusetts, and it was in operation from early 1942, which is really, really early. And I don't know if any of you guys have watched the film The 6888, which is on Netflix.
Yes, we watched it.
Which is obviously tells a really groundbreaking story of the 6888 Postal Battalion. And before I looked into the Clubmobile, run by the African Americans. I assumed that they were the first Black Americans to actually come over as a female unit, but we've actually got these Black American Red Cross women who were serving 3 years beforehand in Britain. So there's so many kind of covered stories that need to be dug up. So yeah, that's another really interesting angle.
Well, if you need any help with that, we volunteer.
Oh, definitely be recruiting you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Give
That
us
would be
a
nice.
call.
I think we've saved a picture somewhere of the African American women in the Clubmobile, Gabby. We
Yes.
have it somewhere.
I'm pretty sure I have
Um,
a photo of it. I think we used it in a post for National Coffee Day.
We
Oh,
did.
great.
We did.
So
Nice.
it might be on our Instagram, but I definitely have it. I have, because I'm a nerd, I have everything kind of internalized in
like
folders on my phone. Like,
That's what you need.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
'cause
going
sorry.
back to when you said that they married and their surnames changed, I think the only updated one is the one on the 100th Bomb Group website with the picture of the 3 Red Cross girls, and you see, I think it's Hilda. Hilda's name goes.
Didn't she marry the doctor?
She married the doctor on
Did.
base, and
The base surgeon? Yeah, she married the
yeah,
base surgeon.
and that's the only
Yeah.
one really I've found that has ever like had an updated name. So you
Yeah.
can be like led to her.
Yeah,
Have
it makes
you
life easier.
have you been finding it extremely difficult to find the things afterwards, or has it been relatively easy?
So, newspapers.com is our friend. It's so useful because back in the 1940s, especially for women of a higher kind of class and social standing, it seems that everything was recorded in a newspaper. So every time someone got married, you'd have a full write-up about what the bride was wearing, what the bridesmaids were wearing. So that's a really good starting point for finding out what happened to the women afterwards. And also, luckily, a lot of women kept their maiden name in their surname somewhere, which definitely helps. So yeah, it's not impossible. There are some dead ends, but we're quite lucky as well in that a lot of the women who served in Britain went on to serve in France and into Germany. So,
Right.
for example, a lot of the women on Tattie's Clubmobile went over to France in July 1944, and then they all seemed to gather at Le Havre at Camp Lucky Strike at the end of the war, and from there they caught a ship back to the US. So we've got passenger lists which lists a lot of those women, which is another really useful resource.
Amazing.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, really. You find so many of the women who like Hilda, who married American soldiers while they were over there. So there's often newspaper articles about that. And I think a lot of that comes because the American Red Cross women were really encouraged to spend their free time in the officers club. So even though the women in the Aero Club were serving the enlisted men, one kind of gripe that a lot of the GIs had is that the women would spend their free time with the officers rather than with the enlisted men. But that's probably for a number of reasons, probably because they're from very similar backgrounds to the officers rather than perhaps the enlisted men. So yeah, you see a lot of marriages. One example is from Flixton, which is home of the 446th Bomb Group, and there was a Red Cross staff member there called Erna Tawney, and she ended up marrying a pilot of a B-24 on the base, and they got married in the local church. So you've got all of those records as well. Yeah, so there's plenty of love stories like that, which yeah, every time I read one, I'm like, oh, you can make a film just about this. Like, it's just such a romanticized period, and obviously lots of heartbreak, but lots of moments of light relief as well. And one of my favorite Red Cross volunteers, she was actually a British civilian. Called Annie Hayward, and she was from Suffolk, and she volunteered at Great Ashfield's Red Cross Club. She was a civilian volunteer, but so she was kind of serving the coffee, serving the sandwiches at the club. But the Americans soon realised that she was a really talented artist, so they recruited her to paint all of the nose art on their B-17s.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, so they've got so many photos in the collection of her artwork, and she also painted a lot of murals around the base, a lot of jackets, and she was she was a bit of a stunner as well. There's like photos of her, so she had a lot of boyfriends or love interests. So I was really lucky enough to inherit her collection and take it into the IWM's collection, which includes loads of letters from the guys. And there's one who he used to visit the Red Cross Club a lot, and he would use a piano and he would play a bit of Debussy. And then one night they realised that he didn't come in, they couldn't hear the music, and they found out later on that he'd crashed and he'd been taken prisoner. So they weren't quite sure what had happened to him. And then in 1945, just after the war had ended, before they were all going to pack up, they suddenly heard the sound of this Debussy Claire de Lune playing on the piano, and there he was. And
That's sweet.
I know, and he later wrote a letter to Annie saying that the only thing that got him through his time in the POW camp wasn't thinking about his family back home, but it was thinking about the Red Cross girls and the friendship that they'd given him. And it's such a sweet story.
That is so sweet.
Yeah. So that must have happened at so many bases as well. It's just one example, but it just shows you that impact they had on the guys.
I feel like the close proximity and the emotional labor that these girls did probably, I guess today we'd use the term trauma bond, like in some way that they had bonded, platonically and romantically in some cases, even though that we found out that was a big no, shouldn't be doing that. But I feel like they bonded so well because, as you said, it was the first familiar face that they saw when they went to the briefing hut after a mission. That I feel like there's something to say about these women that volunteered to essentially serve men for an indeterminate amount of time. There was so much emotional labor that went into it. So I'm not surprised that a lot of these women and a lot of these airmen, were romantically involved.
Yeah. 100%. I just think it must have been really hard to maintain a distance because, like you said, they were really discouraged from forming romantic relationships with the men, and they had to be seen as being this kind of like you can look but you can't touch figure. And they'd dance with the men, and they were so good at making people feel special that a lot of times these guys would think, oh, maybe I'm in with a chance here, and basically everyone on the base would be having the same ideas. And they must have had a really thick skin as well, because being in that kind of masculine environment, they no doubt have received a few inappropriate words or wolf whistles and that kind of thing. And but you don't really hear about that. You hear about that they were fully aware that that's what their job was, and that they were there for morale as much as anything else. So you just got to remember these were really intelligent women, and they were obviously very emotionally intelligent, and they knew when a guy was maybe having a tough day, and they could cheer him up with a few kind words. And they also, it's weird because they were both kind of a figure of perhaps romantic interest and the kind of the ultimate girl next door, but then they were also quite a motherly figure. So they would often sew like corporal stripes onto the guys' uniforms for them, or they'll help repair and sew on buttons. So they're kind of doing a kind of motherly role in that respect, and they would also be very encouraging of the men to write letters back home. So one of the big morale boosters that was recognised during the war was letter writing. So guys were always encouraged to write back to their homes to try to maintain those ties back with their loved ones in America. So those women, as part of their role, were making sure that the men had the stationery they needed. They'd even give out letter templates sometimes, like where the guys just had to fill in the gaps, basically. And we get that at the Red Cross home, the Flak homes a lot. So in our collection, we've got a letter which is all typewritten, and it's kind of like, I'm having a great stay at Coombe House. I've been doing skeet shooting. There's a butler here. We served fresh orange juice. It's great. And it's all written out, and the guys just basically have to sign their name. Which makes sense because we have other letters in our collection from the guys that were sent back home and talking about their stays. And I was wondering why they were all so similar and talked about the same things. And
it's because they
were just given like this template, which was definitely like like a kind of PR exercise as well, just to show
Yeah.
the people back home that the boys were being well looked after.
Right.
Yeah.
I find that so funny because is that Gabby, you'll agree with me that that is such a boy thing to do. We say this all the time that he's such a boy or this is such a boy. That is the most
Boy behavior.
boy
Yes.
behavior.
Yeah, 100%. I guess these
Here
guys
we
are just,
did
like,
all this
so
work for you.
young.
Just sign your
Yeah,
name at the
Just
bottom.
put your name at the
we
bottom.
did the
Just
homework for you.
tell your mama you're okay. It's fine.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
What is the thing that you have found the most interesting throughout your entire career so far? It doesn't have to be the ARC. What is something that has stuck with you from
Oh,
school age all the way up till now?
yeah, that's such a good question. I think it's kind of depressingly being in the museum world and knowing so much about our collection and like what we hold and its significance and what kind of stories it can unlock. It's just when I talk to someone about this type of history of World War II is how little people often know, and that's not a criticism, but it's just I often find like actually people there's this amazing history and people like we were saying, they just haven't had that opportunity to explore it. And I think that there are so many stories, particularly like the American Red Cross and the Black GIs, for example, which could engage different audiences that perhaps don't feel connected to this history. So that's kind of from a career point of view, that was one of my life ambitions to try to bring this history to as many people as possible. And I think with the Second World War in general, kind of beginning from my very early interest in just like watching Saving Private Ryan and playing Medal of Honor and Call of Duty and stuff, realizing that it wasn't a masculine environment, that there were these stories that really need telling. So yeah, I think is a bit cheesy, but just that the Second World War and military history in general can be for everyone.
Yeah.
So that's my biggest takeaway, and what I'd love to see is more women engaged in this history. I know there are a few historians, particularly looking at the American Red Cross, which is great. So yeah, that's my biggest takeaway. And hopefully, if people are listening to this podcast and they have a general interest and they can perhaps share it with other people and get more people involved. And it often just starts with a visit to a museum, like it did for me. So yeah, that's my
It
my
really
biggest
does.
kind of thing I've
Yeah.
learned over the years.
I do have one final fun question.
Oh
Obviously,
yeah.
you work in one of the, in my opinion, the greatest museums ever. What's your favorite artifact at your workplace?
Oh my goodness. I would say other than the B-17. I mean,
She's beautiful.
she's a beauty,
She's
and
gorgeous.
I feel really bad because there's the B-24 sitting behind her, which is also a great aircraft, but not quite as good to look at as the B-17.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, and in my job, I'm lucky enough to occasionally be allowed to go inside the aircraft. And when you're
Oh,
inside the B-17, you're up in the cockpit, and you kind of get a sense of what the guys went through. It's so narrow and it's so cramped. And when you imagine you've got your flight suit on, you've got your, maybe if you've got a bailout, you strap your parachute on. How those guys managed to get out of that aircraft with those centrifugal forces working away, I do not know. So a little fun fact actually is that our B-17 was measured up by the producers during the pre-production of Masters of the Air.
yeah.
They came. We had John Orloff come and he just tried to experience what being inside a B-17 was like, which then informed the script. But they also took measurements and they used that to build the replica B-17. But they quickly realised actually there was no way they were going to be able to fit two normal sized adults in there with all of the film equipment.
Yeah.
So they did make it a bit bigger. So the
Yeah.
replicas aren't exactly the right size. So yeah, anyway, B-17 amazing. But in terms of smaller artifacts, there is one which I just adore. So, do you guys know William Wyler, who directed the Memphis Belle back
Yes.
in 1943? So, while he was at Bassingbourn, home of the 91st Bomb Group, and while he was doing his filming, he had a cigarette lighter with him. And so every time he met a kind of a high-ranking general, he would ask them to sign it. So he's got I think he's got Carl Spotz's signature. He's got Ike's signature, I think, Ira Aker, even Winston Churchill, and then he's got all of the crew of the Memphis Belle, and they've all signed that engraved their names onto the cigarette lighter. So we've got that on display in the American Air Museum, and I just love that. There's so much history in one tiny little object. So yeah, that's probably my favorite.
That's wonderful.
That's
I love
amazing.
that. Gabby, do you have anything else you want to ask?
Are you guys hiring at the museum?
Oh,
See?
I wish we were. I'm kind of a one gal army, so I've got my hands full. It would be great to have another curator
them to
helping me
open
out.
up.
willing to relocate.
Get them to open up 2 spots. Here's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I've always promised this. I will adopt Gabby so that she can just come with me with no issue. So there we go.
Yeah, perfect. I can make some
Easy
room in the office for
peasy.
you
Thank
guys.
you so much. We're not that big. We
No.
can squeeze in somewhere in the corner. Thank you so much for doing
Oh,
this.
this was great. Thank you so much.
This was
Thank you for
wonderful.
inviting me.
Of
I
course.
love the podcast. I can't wait to hear what else you're going to be covering.
We have a few surprises up our sleeve. We're trying to keep everything in our pocket at the moment so that when it comes out, it's more of a
Yeah, more of a surprise.
surprise. Yeah.
Can people can follow the museum on Instagram?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so on Instagram, on Facebook, we're
Mhm.
the American Air Museum in Britain, or you can follow Imperial War Museum. I'm also on Twitter, Hattie Hearn. Yeah, so give me a follow and try to come down and visit us at Duxford. It'd be great to see you.
Absolutely should.
Absolutely.
It's great. My 6-year-old memory is very small, but I know that it was beautiful. See, the fact is that I remember it. It's a core memory, but I said, oh, that's a nice plane.
Exactly.
And then I
Yeah.
went
And
home.
I wish I had made more time or
Yeah.
had more time on my trip to get out there.
When we
Yeah,
go
I really
together,
regret
we
it.
will go.
Yeah.
Oh,
promise.
definitely. I'll get you in the B-17.
Oh, please.
That would be great.
Would love that.
Again, we
Wonderful.
don't take up a lot of room. We'll just slide right in.
We're just going to squeeze in again.
Slide right in.
Thank you so much, Hattie.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you.